Elena always believed that love lived in the smallest details. In the smell of freshly brewed coffee, in the way the morning sun spilled across their kitchen table, and most of all in words. Her world was made of ink and paper. Every night, when Adrian fell asleep beside her, she would take out her old leather-bound notebook and write to him. Letters she never meant to send, confessions of affection, of gratitude, of dreams she dared not speak aloud. She loved words because they never interrupted her. They listened, absorbed, and stayed. Her handwriting carried the weight of her heart, neat, gentle, full of devotion. Each word was a promise, sealed with hope. Adrian used to read her letters sometimes, smiling in that lazy, effortless way that melted her. "You're my poet," he'd whisper, kissing the top of her head. And she'd blush, thinking how lucky she was to love and be loved like this. Together they built a small art studio by the river. He handled the clients. She filled the space with colors that reflected her soul, warm, bright, full of life. They'd spend hours there laughing over spilled paint and smudged canvases, dreaming about future exhibitions. In those days, love seemed eternal and forever felt easy. But forever, she would learn, has a fragile heart. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Ordinary, like most tragedies are. Adrian was in a rush that morning, leaving behind his jacket on the chair by his desk. She only meant to tidy up. The scent of his cologne still lingered, familiar and comforting. But when she reached into the pocket to hang it, her fingers brushed against an envelope. A woman's handwriting. Elegant, curved, confident. Elena froze. For a long moment she stared at the envelope, her mind refusing to understand what her heart already knew. It wasn't addressed to her. Her name wasn't there. Instead it read simply, "To my love, I can't wait for your wife to find out." Her breath caught. The world tilted. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. The words were short, intimate, cruelly beautiful. The kind of letter she used to write, full of yearning, of secret promises, of stolen nights. She read every word twice, not because she didn't understand them, but because she couldn't believe them. Tears blurred the ink until the sentences bled into one another, black veins on white paper. She pressed her hand over her mouth to silence the sob that rose from somewhere deep inside, a sound too broken to belong to her. Adrian came home late that night. He kissed her cheek, mumbled something about a meeting, and went to shower. She watched him quietly, studying his face, his movements, the way he smiled without looking her in the eyes. Everything seemed normal, but nothing was. She didn't confront him. Not that night. Not the next. She smiled, cooked his favorite dinner, and kissed him goodnight. But behind her calm eyes, something was shifting. A slow, aching realization that love, as pure as it once was, had turned to glass. And glass, when cracked, never shines the same way again. Later, when he slept beside her, she took out her notebook again. But this time her pen hesitated. The words didn't flow like before. Her tears fell onto the page, mixing with the ink until they became one. Salt and sorrow, love and loss. That night she wrote not to Adrian but to herself. "I thought our story was written in love, but maybe it was only ever written in illusion." And as the candle flickered beside her, she didn't know it yet, but the ink that carried her heartbreak would one day carry her revenge. The same ink. The same tears. Just a different story. Elena didn't scream that night. She didn't throw the letter in Adrian's face or demand the truth that already clawed inside her chest. Instead, she folded the paper carefully, like something sacred and fragile, and placed it in the drawer beside her notebook. Then she smiled, the same soft smile that used to belong to a woman in love, though now it felt like a mask carved from grief. The next morning she made him breakfast. Pancakes, his favorite. She even laughed at his stories, her voice light and effortless, though every sound scraped her throat raw. Adrian didn't notice the emptiness behind her eyes. He never looked long enough to see it. He had become a man distracted, phone always buzzing, gaze always somewhere else. And she let him. Silence became her weapon, sharp, invisible, and patient. While he believed her blind, she began to see everything more clearly than ever before. The perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his shirts. The late-night messages he thought he'd deleted. The way he began to shower twice before bed. Each small detail stitched itself into the fabric of her quiet rage. But she never raised her voice. Not once. At night, she would sit by her desk, the moonlight spilling across her open journal. She no longer wrote love letters, she wrote records. Every lie, Every date, every hollow excuse, preserved in neat lines of ink. It became her ritual, her therapy, her secret. The pages filled slowly, soaked in memory and pain. Sometimes her tears would fall onto the paper, leaving tiny watermarks that blurred her handwriting. She didn't wipe them away. She wanted them there, proof that her heart had bled honestly. Days turned into weeks and Adrian grew more careless. He mistook her silence for surrender, her calmness for ignorance. He didn't see the quiet transformation happening before him, how her softness was hardening, how her love was turning into something colder, sharper. Elena began to paint again, though her colors had changed. The pastels she once adored were replaced by deep reds and shades of gray. Each brushstroke carried a weight, each painting a secret. She told him she was experimenting with new themes, something darker, she'd said with a faint smile. At night, when she couldn't sleep, she would open the drawer, unfold the letter and read it again, not to hurt herself but to remember. To keep the pain alive long enough to shape it into purpose. Her silence grew heavier, more deliberate. Adrian, sensing nothing, continued his double life. And every lie he told became another line in her invisible story. One she was still writing, one he would one day read for himself. Elena no longer cried at night. The tears had dried, replaced by something far more dangerous, clarity. She now understood that revenge didn't always begin with fury. Sometimes it began with stillness. And in that stillness she began to write again, not with love but with resolve. Because she knew, the ink of her tears was not finished writing yet. Spring arrived quietly, wrapping the town in colors Elena could no longer feel. The world outside bloomed again, yet her heart remained cold, a canvas of silence waiting for its final stroke. Adrian believed the storm had passed. He smiled more often, brought her flowers, even suggested they take a short trip. She smiled back, her lips gentle, her eyes unreadable. He didn't know she had already begun her masterpiece. It started one sleepless night when she sat before a blank canvas, staring at the empty whiteness until her vision blurred. Her trembling hand reached for the brush and she painted without thought, wide, sweeping lines of black and crimson, shapes that screamed pain and betrayal. The colors bled into each other like tears mingling with ink. For the first time since she discovered his secret, she felt alive. Every night after that she painted. Sometimes until dawn. Sometimes until her fingers ached. Each canvas told a fragment of her story. The rise and fall of love, the quiet murder of trust, the rebirth of strength. She called the series The Ink of Us. It was a collection of everything she'd lived, every emotion she'd swallowed, every lie she'd endured. Adrian barely noticed her transformation. He thought her late nights meant inspiration, not intention. He saw only what he wanted to see, his talented wife lost in art again. He never thought the muse behind her work was him. Weeks later, Elena invited him to a private viewing, just family, friends, and a few critics. She told him it was her return to the art world, a celebration of healing. He was proud, almost relieved, believing that she had forgiven him without ever knowing she'd found her revenge instead. The night of the exhibition, the studio glowed softly under dim lights. Guests whispered in awe, admiring the haunting beauty of her work. Each painting seemed alive, faces fading into shadows, hands reaching for something lost, words bleeding across torn pages. Then came the final piece, draped in a dark cloth at the center of the room. When she unveiled it, a collective silence filled the air. It was his portrait. Adrian's face stared back, perfect in detail but hollow in the eyes. His mouth curved in the faintest smile, the kind that once charmed her, now twisted into something almost cruel. Beneath the portrait, written in elegant ink, were her words. "You taught me love with lies. I learned truth through pain." Adrian's breath caught. The crowd began to murmur, their admiration turning into realization. He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time saw the quiet fury behind her calmness. Elena stood there, composed and radiant, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to explain. Her art had spoken for her, her tears transformed into power, her suffering immortalized in beauty. That night, when the applause echoed and the lights dimmed, Adrian knew he had lost her completely. And Elena? He finally felt free. The morning after the exhibition was unusually quiet. The applause had faded, the lights were gone, and the whispers had turned into stories carried across the town. Everyone spoke of Elena's haunting art, the emotion, the truth, the beauty in pain. But for her it wasn't fame that lingered. It was peace. A strange, fragile peace that filled the silence where her heartbreak once lived. Adrian didn't come home that night. She knew he wouldn't. His absence was louder than any confrontation could ever be. Perhaps he stayed with her, or perhaps he sat somewhere alone, finally realizing the weight of what he'd done. It didn't matter anymore. His chapter in her life had closed, not with shouting, not with revenge that burned, but with one that he remembered every time he saw his reflection. For the first time in months, Elena slept without tears. The next morning she packed a small suitcase. Just a few clothes, her notebooks, and one painting, not of him but of herself. A self-portrait painted in soft, uncertain strokes, her eyes filled with something new, freedom. Before she left, she placed a single envelope on the desk, the same spot where she had once found the letter that shattered her heart. Inside was her final message to Adrian. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was simply the truth. I forgive you, not because you deserve it but because I no longer want to carry you with me. She signed it with the same pen that had once written love letters, the same ink that had bled through every chapter of their story. But this time her hand didn't tremble. Elena left the house and walked toward the river where their studio stood silent. The morning light danced on the water, reflecting fragments of gold and silver. A reminder that even broken things can shimmer if you let the light in. She stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of paint, rain, and release. Months passed. Her art gained recognition far beyond what she'd ever dreamed. Galleries called her the woman who paints emotions. But those who truly looked at her work saw more than emotion, they saw rebirth. Every stroke, every shade whispered of survival, of strength born from sorrow. When people asked about her inspiration, she never spoke of Adrian. She only smiled and said, "Every artist paints their truth. Mine was written in tears, until I learned to paint in peace." In her new apartment by the sea, she kept one framed piece above her writing desk. A small handwritten quote that read, "The same ink that once wrote love can also write freedom." And sometimes when the waves crashed against the shore and she sat down to write again, she would dip her pen into that same bottle of ink, not to relive the pain, but to remind herself of everything she had survived. Her story was no longer about revenge. It was about becoming whole again. Because her tears had written her pain. Her ink had written her revenge. But her courage, that wrote her peace.